So I'm going to try not to be an armchair foreign policy expert. So I'm just going to say a few words about what I feel about this particular full-on invasion of Ukraine that the Russian military appears to have done, and that it looks as if it's, from what I've gathered from a particular source on the ground, is that it's pretty much over at this point. I don't know if that's true, but it's a very, very quick invasion. It's unfortunate that this is what countries are doing, and I've showed a Party for Socialism and Liberation sort of statement about Ukraine and NATO and all of that, so you can watch that. So I'm not going to go into that very much, except to say that NATO, as Jason Unruh described, the North Atlantic terrorist organization, has been moving closer and closer to Russia's borders for some time, and it is overthrown the Biden, and with the help of Victoria Nuland, and under the Obama administration, and with the help of John McCain, helped overthrow the Ukraine government, the democratically elected Ukraine government, in 2014, and it's been a Nazi shitfest ever since. And the Azov battalion, there's a lot of Nazis in the Azov battalion. I mean, they openly fly Nazi flags, and they have been attacking the Donbass, and they've killed, I think, 13 to 14,000 people since 2014, when the Ukraine government was overthrown in a coup, a US-backed coup. You always know if there's terrible sort of upheavals in a country, and that the US has probably had something to do with that, the US empire. So I might be wrong, and I'm not very good on details, but this is sort of the short version that I can give about that. And why I'm doing that is because I just wanted to show this analysis by Jason Unruh about the invasion of Ukraine, and he gives quite a nuanced version of it. It's not enough to say stuff about, well, I don't agree with. It's one thing to help defend the people of Donbass from what is an ongoing genocide there. So Putin says that he wanted to defend that, but he also did say in his speech, which I haven't seen the whole of it, but the part that I did see, he said he wanted to do a denazification of Ukraine. I understand why Putin wouldn't want Nazis at his border, and also Nazis that are being also most likely funded. They probably are being funded by the US. I think they are. They were helped into, there's Nazis in the government, literal Nazis. And considering that the Russia has lost 27 million people to Nazis during World War II, wouldn't have helped having Nazis, literally Nazis on your border, who look like they're doing their best to genocide the Russian-speaking Donbass citizens. So no war is a good war, and this is another example of that. But then there's also the fact that the NATO and the US empire have been meddling so much in Ukraine, and also threatening Russia, surrounding Russia, bringing troops up to borders, and bringing NATO closer to borders of Russia, and all of that. The constant saber rattling against Russia in the last 7 or more years has led to this possibly it could be an overreaction. And of course, innocent Ukrainians will be killed or have been killed in this Russian invasion. And you just know that the Ukrainian government, with Zelensky, who's just a US puppet, they're going to exaggerate the carnage to make Russia look like the evil Russian empire that the US has been trying to paint of Russia and Putin for many, many years now. And of course, the reason for that, as you would know, is that Russia and China Russia is becoming a economic power in itself, and it also has superior nuclear weapons, and it is a threat to the US empire's attempts for full spectrum dominance and global hegemony. And the only obstacle to that is Russia and China. They're the two obstacles, and China is becoming a greater economic power. Soon it will overtake the US, and that is unforgivable, and seen as completely unacceptable to the US, who they believe in capitalism as long as they are on top, as long as they have monopolies, as long as they can invade countries for their capitalist aims. The CIA is a invisible army of capitalism. I mean, this is where capitalism is such a problem. Capitalism and imperialism are inextricably linked, and fascism is capitalism and decay. That's what Lenin was putting out there, a very short version of what Lenin was saying about imperialism and capitalism. Well, a little small part of what he was saying. And so, this is Russia and China are seen as these tremendous obstacles for the US for their global dominance and to basically own the markets, call the shots for the markets. They're a capitalist, driven empire. And, you've got people like Elon Musk, talking about Bolivia and saying, we'll coup whoever we want to. That's the sort of attitude that the billionaires, the oligarchy, the capitalist class, etc., that's the kind of attitude they have towards the world. People are just resources. Countries are just countries are just resources to US empire. And that's why it needs to fall. That's the theme of my channel, that US empire needs to fall. Not that I want any other sort of imperialist force to, and Russia is a capitalist and a capitalist country. There needs to be no dominant country. There needs to be, basically solidarity between countries, and that's why socialism is something that would benefit everyone. And that is something that the US does not want and has been trying to stamp out since, over 100 years now. It's been the dominant religion of the US has been anti-communism. It is communism is an enemy of capitalism. Basically, it's an enemy of greed. It's an enemy of basically of greed and of the ego. Basically, if you're wanting people to have equal rights and access to, everybody has access to resources and all of that. So anyway, I'm getting off the track here. So what is sad to me is that here we are on the edge of extinction, and this is what we're doing. We're sort of like, one even has to wonder really underneath all this, the constant meddling by US empire with Russia and saber rattling, whether, obviously they wanted this to happen so then they could apply these tremendous sanctions that I'm very concerned that they may be very, very crippling they're going to be crippling, of course, to the population. Those sanctions, any economic sanctions are an act of war. So that is concerning to me because between China and Russia, there's some parity, and maybe there's a chance that if they have one another's backs, that maybe the US empire will just fall. And at some point, at which they are falling now, but it will help if there are countries that can stand up to them. So I'm concerned about those sanctions. I disagree with. I think one has to wait and see what's going to happen with the outcomes of this invasion for Ukraine, and but who knows? I don't know. I don't agree with war, but then this is sort of there's a playing field happening here that is so messed up, and that is created by US empire, and then you get countries like Russia being pushed into taking an act that was probably extreme, meaning going beyond defending people in Donbass and going to Odessa where a lot of Nazis are and all of that, and basically doing a full-on invasion. That sort of thing happens when a country is pushed and then they take extreme, they end up taking extreme measures, and that's not great. It's not good that the call for help from Donbass, it didn't stop there. It went further than that. But then, that's the problem with having this Nazified government and Nazified military, the Azov Battalion and all of that on your borders, and having NATO pushing more and more and gathering more and more countries, which, has its sights on Russia. That's the problem. And this is, I see this as US empires. This is their fault for this happening, for this invasion of Ukraine, this full-on invasion. I hope I'm making sense. Anyway, what I was saying, I'm going right off the track, and sorry, I start points and then I don't finish them. I realize I do that sometimes. But anyway, I'm concerned these sanctions will badly affect the public in Russia. And then, of course, that's the idea, so that they will sort of try and get rid of Putin. And as many problems as Putin has, he's an oligarch too. As many problems as he has, he's probably the only adult in the room, or has been, when there's these things get very heated. And so is Lavrov, the foreign minister, I think he is the foreign minister. So the sanctions are a worry, but also the absolute ridiculous propaganda that is on Twitter right now and social media. I mean, the propaganda is just everybody has become a foreign affairs expert, and is sort of putting out establishment narratives left and right, and the corporate media is pushing for more war, which is what they do all the time because they're funded by the weapons industry. They show ads for the weapons industry and other corporations that benefit from war. So, you know, the weapons industry is rubbing their hands together. They love all of this. Corporate media is just sickening, the way the questions they ask, and the editorializing when they ask questions. And we have it the same over here. We have Stan Grant, who is, I'm sure, a CIA sort of puppet, and he's been basically pushing for a war on China. And I haven't watched what he's been saying lately, but it's been pretty appalling, I imagine, because I can just tell by what people say on Twitter about what he said. You know, every facet of media, corporate media, including the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, they're all putting out US talking points. It's so disturbing. It's so disturbing living in a country and living in a world where there is so much deception and lies, and it feels like, you know, when William Casey, the CIA director, said in 1981 that the CIA will be successful when everything the public believes are lies. Well, mission accomplished. Because you can't have these kind of, you can't have the US basically going around, which it does, invading and overthrowing governments, democratically elected governments, and funding proxy wars against, you know, sort of democratically elected governments, you know, invading for oil and you know, and lithium and all kinds of things. You can't have that going on, and all the carnage, you know, like for example, the US-backed genocide, Saudi genocide of Yemenis, 377,000 according to a UN report. 377,000 Yemenis. Most of them of children have been killed in the US-backed genocide, Saudi genocide, that is still going on in Yemen. And then you have the economic sanctions on Venezuela that has killed tens of thousands, and you have Afghanistan, which has been, when they left the US government decided to keep billions and billions of dollars of Afghanistan funds, so that Afghani people now are borderline in a famine. They won't give that money back. The UK bank, I can't remember which one, has withheld funds from Venezuela, withheld gold, billions of dollars worth of gold. This is what, you can't have all that going on. Like all this constant meddling in Haiti, the US government, in Haiti, and this is any administration, and Libya, overthrowing Libya, killing Gaddafi, and then now they have literally slavery in Libya. All those different things. You can't have all that going on, and it can only be made aware to the public if you have a dysfunctional fourth estate, if you have a fourth estate that is basically owned by the establishment, and it's just a mouthpiece of the establishment, stenographers for the establishment. If all of this was known to the public, if we had a functional fourth estate, which we do not have in Australia, most of it is owned literally by Rupert Murdoch, and there are 6 or 7 companies that own all the media in the United States. You can't have any kind of democracy if you don't have a healthy fourth estate, and that is something that is not healthy at all. It's basically, they're just stenographers for empire. So this is what is so disturbing about it, is that it's all so sewn up now that the corporate media is just so uniform. And not only that, they actually push, not that they need pushing, but they push politicians to take more extreme measures towards countries like Russia and China. I mean, it really is an insanity. And then you get this global community of people that are completely propagandized And some are bad faith actors, but a lot of people are completely propagandized. I was propagandized about DPRK for a long time. I really thought it was, I really thought people were sort of cannibalizing one another because of the extreme, the extreme poverty and famine and stuff. I mean, before 2013 or 2012, I really did not know what was going on in DPRK, and that's because there weren't any decent media reports about it. And finally, I found out about it by some very good independent journalists. But most people don't get to see that because the Silicon Valley is totally in on the censorship by algorithm and all of that. They are as much propaganda arms of the national security state, the U.S. national security state, the military-industrial complex, the weapons industry. And this is all because we have a capitalist system. Because this is happening because it's profit-driven, and to have continual profits, you have to invade countries and take their resources. It's just something that goes with capitalism. So that's why it has to end. We have to be anti-capitalist as well as anti-imperialist. We have to be, because they're totally meshed together, and they're like the terrible twins. So anyway, this talk by Jason Unruh. I'm sorry, I've gone all over the place as usual. I've been a bit out of the loop on some of these matters, but I watched a lot of different programs on this particular one since this invasion, and including, sort of Jen Psaki, who's just a mouthpiece, of course, of Empire. But I just wanted to see how deranged they are, and what has become apparent to me, and this is something that Jason Unruh pointed out in this thing I'm going to show you that he did today. This analysis that he did today is that it's becoming very clear that NATO is like a toothless tiger, a paper tiger, basically, because they are obviously not wanting to take Russia on. They always had Russia in their sights, and they continue to do so, but they haven't done anything. It's sanctions is what they're doing, and of course they're crippling, and that's an act of war in itself. But for them not to literally militarily engage in this shows how they know that it would turn out very badly, and also that when there were lots of body bags coming home, you can't hide those body bags, basically, because there would be great carnage, and it, of course, would probably end in mutually assured destruction, because Russia has superior hypersonic missiles, it has superior nuclear weapons, superior to the US, which is saying something, because the US has 10 times the military, but Russia has realized to get parity they need superior nuclear weapons to stave off any attacks. Because if it weren't for those weapons, those nuclear weapons, the US would have already invaded. The US would engage with them in Ukraine, and if it was going to be an on-the-ground thing. And that's something that they won't do, because they know that it could get really, really, really nasty. I mean, the US, the Pentagon, some real Dr. Strangeloves in the Pentagon are desperate to use those tactical nuclear weapons. Those limited, so they say, limited damage nuclear weapons. They're absolutely itching to use those. And the weapons industry wants them to use them. And when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you have all these fantastic weapons, you want to use them. That's the problem with having them. That's why there needs to be a nuclear ban. And, but the problem is the US, the minute a country says they're going to get rid of their nuclear weapons, what happens? Like what happened to, what happens to any country? The US goes in and destroys them, and then takes their resources, and then they're in a mess. That's what happens. So until the US empire has fallen, until it ends, when I don't think we're ever going to see the end of this, or we might see the end of it in a big mushroom cloud. That's sadly the case. Or, maybe that will happen before we go extinct. I mean, it's not happy. It's not happy news, and that's why we need to keep fighting. We need to be internationalists and have global solidarity with countries like Venezuela, like in Latin America, the countries that are fighting against US empire all the time, trying to keep their independence, trying to keep looking after the people, etc. And, as much as, I mean, China has its problems, but it is, and, all governments lie, of course, and China has its problems, but it's certainly going around offering help to different countries. There's, of course, a tit-for-tat thing happening there, but at least it's not going around invading and destroying. It's actually offering help to countries, and that is in its own interest too, because if more countries join together with China and Russia, then they have more chance of standing up to this insatiable monster US empire. There were other things I wanted to say. I probably should have taken notes and made points and stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to say, but then this would become a very, very long video, and I did want to show you this analysis by Jason Unruh. And I don't agree with everything that Jason says in other videos, but I think this is pretty good. And I have not read the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They did a most recent essay about this, an update on the last one that I read out. And I haven't read it, but it does point to NATO creating this situation. And unfortunately, because a lot of people are so propagandized, they don't know the history. They don't get any analysis by corporate news except, sort of spouting the US national security state talking points. And so nobody really knows what's actually going on the planet and why these things happen without any nuanced conversation about what led to this invasion by Russia, which is problematic in its extent, but which could have been not too bad had it just remained protecting the citizens of Donbass instead of going to a full-on Nazification. But like I said, it can't be great for a country that has lost 27 million people to Nazis to have Nazis on its border. That can't be great. And to have financed Nazis by the US empire, basically another proxy group. It can't be great having that on your borders. So, but no war and no invasion. It's always everyday people that die. And so violence is never the answer, but this is just such a shit show on so many levels that I don't know. It's very disturbing to me, the level of propaganda that is on, for example, Twitter. I'm leaving Facebook in the next few days. I've decided to delete my account because I just can't. I've been staying on it for a few journalists and also from some people from the Black Agenda Report. And that's really, and also that I had a number of anti-imperialist pages. One was Stop the Next War Against Russia and China, and Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, and The Naked Empire. There are 3 different anti-imperialist pages I had, and one was a group. And I just sort of thought, and my suppression on my own personal account is so bad that I didn't see any point anymore in staying there. I mean, literally, I have like 300 friends, 300 people on my account, my personal account, and literally maybe 1 or 2 people might see 1 post every 10 posts. And usually it's something that is really, if I ever do just something that is a little bit fluffy, like I'll have a photo of our cat or cats, or some sweet little photo of one of our cats or something, then a few people might see it, maybe say 4 or 5. But most of the time, 95% of the time, I just post what I think are important articles by Multipolarista or, Empire Files or something like that, and nobody sees it. And these are people, friends, that basically, most of them are anti-imperialists. A lot of them are either journalists or activists or something, and nobody even sees them. So that's Facebook for you, and I just thought, what's the point in me even being here anymore? And the same with my groups go back. My group was going backwards, and the other 2 pages. I had vegan pages too, and the algorithms killed one of my pages that had 58,000 people in 2012, and it's been going backwards ever since. I mean, Facebook is just a shit show in so many levels. So I just thought, that's enough. I was only staying for these particular journalists and Black Agenda Report people like Margaret Kimberley and Ajama Baraka, and I just thought, nah. So I'm going to end that. So that'll be, I think that'll be good for me because, but basically, I'm sorry, I'm getting off the track here, but basically I'm suppressed on so many platforms, it's crazy. It's really quite insane. Sometimes I point out to someone, I'll say, look at this. There's all these comments around, this particular video on YouTube. And I've made a comment. Everybody else's comments have got dozens of likes, and I haven't got 1 like. I mean, that's the sort of censorship and algorithm censorship I'm facing on YouTube, on Twitter. It's almost the same on Twitter. I don't think it's not hyperbole to say I think I'm uniformly censored by algorithms on pretty much all platforms like that. So, that's a way of making people invisible. That's the way of censoring people without saying, oh, you can say whatever you like, but no one's going to see it. So anyway, and even on this channel, I mean, I don't know what it is, but I can't seem to get past 1650. I get to 1650 or just above, and then suddenly it'll start going back. And then it'll go back up again to 1650, and then it'll go back again. It's like, I don't even know whether there's a cap on my channel. I'm not saying that maybe my content is not good enough to get beyond that, or maybe people, unsubscribe when I do a vegan video, but then subscribe when I do some imperialist thing, or maybe they don't like it sometimes when I just talk about personal stuff, and so it could be my own fault. But it just seems like there is some kind of a restriction on going above 1650. That's what it seems to me, because it's been doing that now for probably over a year now, getting up to 1650 and then going back, and then getting above it a little bit and then going back. So anyway, that's the story of social media, and that's why I'm a tiny channel, but there's so much censorship by algorithm now. It's no wonder people are so propagandized, and it's no wonder you see on Twitter the shit show of propaganda that everyday people are spouting. The ones that aren't doing it in bad faith, but just doing it because that's what they think they understand, and just helping promote the U.S. imperialist narrative. I mean, it's just literally everywhere. Have a look. It's just sickening. It's sickening, and then you think to yourself, it is no wonder we're in the state we're in right now. It is just no wonder. So anyway, I'm going to show this now, Jason Unruh. I'm not saying I agree with every single thing he says, but I think this is a fairly nuanced kind of a look at this, full-on invasion of Ukraine, which seems to be over, from what I understand now. It was very quick. I don't really believe in, I'm not into killing anybody. I loathe fascism. I'm anti-fascist, so I'm not into, he says at the end, kill a fash or whatever. I'm not, but it's like, I understand, I won't reiterate what I've said. But anyway, so check out this next piece. I'll play it in total, because I think the whole thing is quite good. So thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vigo. Much love to you. And let's hope that this doesn't escalate into some sort of a gigantic global war that is starts off on the ground and ends up in a mushroom cloud. I don't think it will. But then I didn't think that Russia would actually go this far and go, a full-on invasion. I didn't think that. And so what do I know? So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for this next piece.
So the entire world is watching as Putin and the rest of Russia has invaded the country of Ukraine. Now, to be honest, I didn't think he was going to do it. I thought that he was going to come in to the break-off provinces and defend them from the neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian government and society. That is what I thought would happen. I didn't think Putin would go to the point of invading the entire country, going all the way to Kiev, but apparently that seems to be the case. This is what he has chosen to do. And I'm kind of blown away by this. I was wrong on this one. And I didn't think he'd be crazy enough to do it, but apparently he is. But what's really funny is the people who have said to me, I told you so. Except here's the problem. You didn't know so. You literally just went along with whatever hyperbole and scaremongering the Western media went with. So what are you even talking about? You didn't know anything or analyze anything. You just did whatever the media told you. So don't act like you knew. You didn't know anything. That's pretty laughable. Something to note is that essentially Russia won the war in like 5-6 hours. that they came in, a lot of the Ukrainian military just laid down their arms and surrendered. Many of those on the border just completely just let Russian forces come into the country, particularly from Belarus, without even putting up much of a fight. The Ukrop anti-air defense was taken down in about no time whatsoever. The Ukrainian military really didn't stand a chance at all in this situation. And I think that's something that Putin very clearly knew, and something the president of Ukraine very well knew, which was why all the way up until the 11th hour he was saying that diplomacy was possible and wanted to do everything to avoid war, because he knew he couldn't win. Now, it's interesting to note that Ukraine fell faster than Baghdad did, faster than Iraq did during Desert Storm. So this is not a world record for the shortest war ever, which is something you can look up on Wikipedia. I think it's something like 45 minutes or something. But it's pretty damn quick. Now, Russia, of course, is going to suffer a great deal of consequences as a result of this. Basically, all of the advanced first world countries have placed sanctions on Russia to punish not just Putin, but the leaders, ministers of many countries, ministers of many cabinets, people in high positions of power, people in very large businesses, basically anything that they can do without actually resorting to some kind of physical violence. And I think that's the key here. By doing this, and NATO not doing anything about it, has sent a very clear message. Now, the purpose of the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization has always been to try to contain and threaten the Soviet Union. Of course, you'd wonder what NATO was still doing existing decades after the Soviet Union didn't. Obviously, it was placed there to still be a threat to Russia in general, to forward U.S. interests inside the region, particularly the Baltic states. But here's the thing. For weeks now, the U.S. has been saying that NATO will invade Russia or attack Russia if Russia does go into Ukraine, which Russia has now done. But NATO, so far, is nowhere to be found. It appears that the United States doesn't really want, or didn't really want, a war with Russia at all. Politically, it's a nightmare. Economically, it might be a lot worse. I mean, we know the military-industrial complex and how it props up the U.S. economy, etc. But there are limits to everything. One must consider the amount of resources that the United States has now, and much of it being freed up after having left Afghanistan after that failure. Although many of them still claim that the U.S. won the war in Afghanistan, even though they didn't. So it's a question. What kind of message is being sent by not going in and fighting Russia? It sends one very clear, powerful message. NATO's not going to do anything. What lesson have we learned from this? We have learned that NATO may in fact be a paper tiger. For all of its bluster, for all of its endless spending on weapons and machines of death, it didn't do the very thing that it was created to do, or at least its second life was intended to do, and that was attack Russia. Or defend from Russia, etc., what have you. Now, every country in Europe, particularly the Baltic states, now know NATO is toothless. It's not actually going to do anything, although that's what it's supposed to do. This is now going to be a very simple, clear message that NATO is not the power that it claimed to be, or maybe even once was. That what they say doesn't mean anything, even to their own allies. NATO's not going to be there, even if they claim that they are. Now, Biden may turn around later and say, okay, it's time for war. Maybe. I doubt it. But you never know. I think the message has already been sent. So, given all of this, and of course the mainstream media is not going to talk about how NATO's been undermined, etc. What do you think they're talking about right now? It's like about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning as I'm recording this. And I was going by MSNBC, maybe about 45 minutes, an hour ago. I was watching Morning Joe. What do you think they were talking about? What do you think is like the most important thing attached to this conflict? Well, naturally, it's Israel. Israel, this was what Micah and Joe Scarborough felt was the really important angle that needed to be pushed in this case, was how Israel was going to react to this and what this means for Israel. Which is really weird because this has nothing to do with Israel whatsoever. Now, I think the greater context might have been, what does this mean for U.S. allies? Well, what if now China decided to say, well, Taiwan, you're coming home? And China went in and took it. Well, we saw last time when it was Ukraine and Russia, the U.S. didn't do anything. But for some reason, they hyper-focused on Israel because Israel's been our longest, strongest ally, and to quote Joe Scarborough, we've been the staunchest ally. I've been supporting them since 1948, 47, whatever. But it's like kind of really weird that this says, and to help Israel, our greatest allies, is, okay, well, you're committing genocide against Palestinians. Don't think that somehow because of this that Israel is now in a great, terrible position, because Russia's very happy to do a lot of trade with Israel. And China is very happy to do a ton of trade with Israel, despite being, a socialist country, allegedly, and nothing says international solidarity with oppressed peoples like funding the people who are committing genocide against them. But I digress. I just thought it was so strange how they put so much energy into talking about Israel on a European issue. Like, the invasion of Ukraine really doesn't have anything to do with Israel itself. But for some reason, they hyper-focused on that. And congratulations, because that's the kind of nonsense that gives fuel to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Good job. But listening to the rhetoric, all of this rhetoric about how Russia is violating a sovereign country and the world needs to stand up and tell them that's not okay, and while that may or may not be true, the amount of hypocrisy is staggering. Think about that. The United States is telling another country that they're wrong for occupying another one. With a panel of 6 people to talk about the issue, nobody mentioned the elephant in the room, which would be the U.S. continued illegal occupation of Iraq, illegal occupation of Syria, their continued occupation of many countries around the world, and that Russia's meddling in the political affairs of other countries. I'm sorry, was this the United States who just said that? Okay, because it sounded like the United States was criticizing someone for interfering in the politics of another country, considering that's literally the purpose of the existence of the CIA. And, while it is kind of, it's a logical fallacy to point that out, that Russia's invasion is okay because the U.S. does it all the time, and I don't think that's fair. If an invasion is wrong, an invasion is wrong. But it's that building pressure in your head whenever the United States condemns someone for doing something that they've been doing for a century, even longer, and are currently doing right now. The point here that I'm trying to make is that the US and NATO are not to be trusted. They are, for every criticism that you could have of Russia and Putin, which there would be a fair amount of criticisms to make, they are astronomically, the US is astronomically worse. And it is nothing but total projection coming from the US. The U.S. is not to be trusted. To be perfectly honest, my actual position is that Ukraine should probably not have been invaded by Russia. I fully support the military defense of the two break-off provinces. The ethnic Russian areas which voted freely and democratically to leave Ukraine, they should be able to leave. And if the Russian military is asked to help them maintain their independence from Ukraine, then by all means, it's free and fair. That is to say that I am not on Russia's side. I am on the side of the people of Donbass, etc., who have freely and fairly chosen to leave. And that is their right. And that countries in the world who would come to their defense to assist them are right in doing so. Time will tell whether or not invading all of Ukraine was a good idea. It cannot be denied that there's a great deal of fascism inside of Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, the neo-Nazi militias, etc. But I'm wondering if this was really the right thing to do. Obviously, bash the fash is always good, but is it okay when another imperialist country does it? And I know a lot of people might point that out with regards to my position on Syria. To which I would answer that despite my criticisms of Russia, despite my criticisms of Putin, Bashar al-Assad is the real, legitimate leader of Syria. And if they want Russian assistance, that is their choice. The issue with the Kurds, however, allying with the United States is completely different. Because the Kurds are essentially helping the United States steal oil from the country, and even then, the U.S. has now abandoned them. Which, I don't know at what point you would have to realize that you can't trust the United States. I mean, it's not like they've done this more than once, the Kurds, before. And that the very simple answer would be a federated state. Give a large piece of territory, give some territory to Kurds inside of Syria, and make it part of a federal government, and you would have peace. You would have all the cultural, religious autonomy that the Kurds deserve, and they do deserve to have that. They would have the right to write a fair amount of laws regarding their own society and the way that they wanted to live, and they'd be part of a larger federated state. And everybody could live in peace. In fact, my criticism of Assad would be for not offering that to begin with. I would also criticize Russia for not pressuring Assad into doing that. So I just wanted to note the difference. Because a lot of people like to point out hypocrisy rather than understanding the nuance of two positions. It's hard to justify not overthrowing neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And in the end, I believe that getting rid of Nazis will overall be best. But we have to keep in mind that Russia is an imperialist country. It's a capitalist imperialist country. And that its motives are not wholly altruistic as we would have if, say, the Soviet Union did this. Now, despite protestations from any ginger journalists, Russia is not great, untouchable, wonderful, altruistic in its being. It's a capitalist imperialist power, like many other countries. Not exactly the same. It has their own dimensions, their own aspects to it. But in the end, who do we really want in Ukraine? I would say let Ukraine run itself. But that's not who's running Ukraine right now. It's neo-Nazis backed by the West. And that is right to destroy. I think maybe the point I'm trying to make here is that there really is no ideal solution in this situation. There is what we would like things to be. We would like how they are. We would like how we want this to turn out. And how things can possibly turn out in this situation. Because we don't have a Soviet Union anymore. We don't have a socialist China anymore, despite protestations to the contrary. So we have to make do with what it is that we have. And at least we can hold on to one fundamental principle. Bash the fash. And at least that, in this situation, we are going to get.